A quick note before I start this video, this originally was a segment in a much longer video on the Indiana Jones film, specifically Raiders of the Lost Ark. I still plan to make that video, but I think I'll wait till Dial of Destiny is released to get a full look at the franchise. Maybe I'll do a countdown thing where every week or so I talk about each of the films, I don't know. But the reason I separated this particular segment is that it was just too long for a video about the entire movie, and the reason I didn't scrap it is because I think it's good enough to deserve its own video. For some background, I marathoned all four of the Indiana Jones movies technically in one day, and for practically the first time, and I loved most of them so much that I wanted to make a video about it. So, here is, in my opinion, the greatest opening sequence to any film ever made. Raiders of the Lost Ark was based upon a story by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman that's more or less a riff on the classic adventure serials they watched as a kid. With Steven Spielberg behind the camera and a screenplay by Lawrence Kasdan, the film released in 1981 to acclaim from critics and audiences alike, even winning 5 Academy Awards, which is crazy considering the type of film it is. If you haven't watched Raiders in a while, I urge you to revisit it ASAP as possible. Before my most recent rewatch, I thought it was a good movie. I mean, it's Indiana Jones, but kind of boring. It was like 4 years ago, alright? Cut me some slack. Then, on the 15th of January, 2023, around midnight, I booted up Amazon Prime and watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, and somehow I stayed awake and interested through all of it. Set in 1936, the film begins with the most iconic first 10 minutes in cinematic history. As I said in my video on The Shining, Steven Spielberg opens his films with a 5 to 10 minute tone setter that lets the audience know what they've gotten themselves into. While Jaws' cold open is meant to construct suspense, the opening of Raiders is treated as an effective introduction to the character of Indiana Jones, while also being a thrilling adventure to capture the audience's attention. What makes it so different from Spielberg's other cold opens is that it follows the structure of a short film within itself. It has exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and a resolution, while simultaneously acting as a prologue to a larger story. If the film began with Indy's archaeology lecture, story-wise nothing would change. However, without the expository adventure, we wouldn't be aware of Indy's badassery, and the transition from professor to, well, badass would not run as smoothly as it does. Also, since the excitement factor is so high, the slower subsequent scenes give the audience a chance to catch their breath while also letting the real story begin. In all actuality, the first 10 minutes of Indiana Jones have nothing to do with the story, but it's one of the things the film needs to be Indiana Jones. The production design by Norman Reynolds reminds me so much of the Disneyland ride. I mean, yeah. And it perfectly represents my mind's interpretation of a ruined temple. The idol switcheroo is a seemingly ingenious plan, and since Indy's a hero, of course we'd expect him to get away with it. But the moment the rumbling starts, a touch of humanity and arrogance is subtly mixed into the character archetype of Indiana Jones. For a good chunk of this and Temple of Doom, Indy is kind of an asshole. Even his introductory shot, where he steps into the light from the shadows, isn't meant with the traditional hero opening like Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi. Also, this guy is Alfred Molina. Yeah, that's right. Dr. Otto Octavius' first ever on-screen appearance was in Indiana Jones. Secret Wars better not let up. Ironically enough, he and Indy encounter spiders in the temple's entryway. The seeds were planted from the very beginning. When Indy's plan goes poppycock, that's a word, the infamous boulder chase begins. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Returning to the story pyramid I mentioned, this is the climax of the scene. This chase. To further the display of Indy's arrogance, not only does his plan to retrieve the idol fail miserably, but as soon as he escapes the temple, it gets taken away from him by a rival archaeologist who is now the leader of this tribe. The tribe chases and attacks him dead man's chest style, and Indy narrowly escapes on a biplane, snake in its cockpit.
I hate snakes, Chuck! I hate him!
I really appreciate the decision to not only introduce Indy as a badass, but also as a human. The first time we see Indiana Jones is on a mission in which he loses 3 times. That and the fact that I, too, hate snakes. Immediately after the chase concludes, we cut to an archaeology lecture by Professor Henry Jones. Somehow, the transition from a plane flying above a jungle to a college is fairly smooth considering the jarring shift in scenery. Personally, I believe that it is due to the score by John Williams. All of his franchise compositions excel at world building, and it's the same here. Though I prefer his work in Star Wars and Harry Potter, the score for this film is a lot subtler compared to those and fits the scenes perfectly. While Star Wars and Harry Potter's immersion levels are skyrocketed through the roof by the score. Indiana Jones takes place in real life and in the 30s, so in my opinion, the slightly subtler tone works. Following the lecture, a couple of military smart people come into his classroom and brief him about this film's MacGuffin, the Ark of the Covenant. When I was younger, I used to think that scenes like this were boring as hell, which is why I used to look at this film in a more negative light. However, times have changed and I was in awe for the entire scene. Lawrence Kasdan's screenplay is one of those things that's like, oh, it's Indiana Jones, and then you actually watch it and realize that, oh, it's Indiana Jones, like, actually good movies. Basically, Hitler thinks his army will become invincible with the Ark, so Indy is tasked with stopping the Nazis from retrieving it. But wait, that has nothing to do with what we just saw. As I said, the opening scene, story-wise, is pointless. However, in the long run, it is needed to make this film what it is today. If Jaws didn't introduce the dangers of the ocean as early as it did, there would be far less tension than there is in the actual product. If Jurassic Park didn't introduce the dangers of the dinosaurs first, A, the tension would once again be reduced, and B, it would just be boring. Oh, and C, we wouldn't get the Dino Park exposition needed to understand where we are. Actually, it's called Jurassic Park. It is commonly stated that the most important parts of your film are how you begin it and how you end it. While the ending of a film feeds into the audience's expectations and overall satisfaction, the beginning introduces them to whatever we need to get to that point. Not an exposition dump,
Like that's ever gonna happen.
but a formal introduction to the world, characters, and most importantly, the film.